Prabhupada came in December, he did perform a wedding ceremony for Jivananda and Harsharani. And I was there for that. And I think my brother got initiated at that time also. And some devotee said to me, why don't I get initiated? And I thought, well, I'm not qualified, that's only for very high, elevated, that's a very special thing. And they said, no, just ask Prabhupada. At that time we called him Swamiji. So one day after the lecture, I raised my hand and I said, Swamiji, can I get initiated? And he looked at me and he said, will you follow the 4 principles? I said, yes. So then he nodded his head, okay. At that time, 4 other people shot up their hands and they said, can I get initiated? Can I get initiated? And Prabhupada said yes to all of them. So it was shortly after that see, my brother Krishnadas told me I should go up to Prabhupada's room, which was down the street on Willard. So I went up there one evening and I spoke to Prabhupada. I said, Swamiji, my brother Krishnadas tells me that you came back in this life because in your past life you killed a snake. So Prabhupada said, oh, your brother has told you that? And I said, yes. And that's, that was what I said to him. I didn't think of anything else to say to him.
The first instruction, actually it was a little bit of sauce. I remember the first day that I cooked, I was very nervous. I prepared things and I took them in and put them on his table. He had a little buzzer that he would ring for the servant to come. So I served him his lunch, waited, and when he rang the buzzer, I came in to take his plates and I took them out to the kitchen and I forgot to wipe the spot on his desk. So after a few minutes he rang his buzzer and I came back in and he said, you've forgotten to wipe the spot. And I said, I'm sorry, Prabhupada, and I went and got a cloth. The next day I forgot again. And when I came in, he rang his buzzer and I came in and he was strong. He said, you have forgotten again. And I remember, I took it seriously, but I took it lightly. I said, oh, I'm sorry, Prabhupada, I'll go do it. And my take on it is that he saw that I wasn't really ready for some heavy chastisement. So for months and months and months after that, I never got chastised for anything else. And I always remembered to wipe the spot.
When I did come back the next day, because I lived in Long Beach, and I took my parents' car and went to the temple early in the morning. I had met Prabhupada's secretary, Shama Sundar, at that time, and he said, "Would you like to go up and see Srila Prabhupada?" And that, of course, that was my intent. My intent was to challenge him. I had come to challenge him to see if he really is a guru, and the aspect I had made I had thought about that morning, and I made 4 points. He has to be able to know the absolute truth. He has to be able to know the process of the absolute truth. He has to be able to read my mind, and he has to know what the future is, be able to predict the future. Now, why I came with those, who knows? But anyway, that's what I thought would give me the right answers. So I was coming in ready for, to challenge Prabhupada, which is the Maya I was in. I was fighting with people. So I came in to challenge Srila Prabhupada. And they brought me in the room, and I sat in the back, was the only open space, and there was all these sannyasis there with dandas, which I hadn't seen before. There was like a room full of sticks. And then there was like 2 people in white dhotis, which were Karandar and Jayatirtha. And then I was the only non-initiated devotee there with my long curling hair, and I was having difficulty sitting in a lotus position because I was too muscular built up. And then Prabhupada was just finished singing a song, and he was looking around the room and looked from side to side, and then he looked straight at me. And immediately he said, "Why are you a creepina?" And just boom, it was like, of course I was thinking, I hadn't said anything now. What is a creepina? and be in my mind. And Prabhupada says, creeping is opposite of Brahmana. And he started explaining how a Brahmana is the highest class in society. They're meant to know the absolute truth and be the mouth for God. And at that point, because he was so heavy, I remember Karandar and Jayatirtha and the sannyasis in the front sort of made a little aisle, so there was a direct contact for Prabhupada and me. And so I was looking at him thinking, what is this? I'm just being, screamed at of being a miserly. It means miserly. And then Prabhupada explained, he said, if you have abilities, and you're not using them for Krishna, then you're a miser. So we had never met before. And I came in challenging, and so Prabhupada first took the first whap and stuck it to me. Then progressively, then he started explaining the process of bhakti, the process that the absolute truth, what the absolute truth is the lotus feet of Krishna, and then he explained the process of bhakti, of rendering service. And so progressively my 4 prerequisites for being a guru was becoming erased one after another. Simultaneously I was being, kicked in the face by Prabhupada's, lotus mercy, by my nonsense challenging spirit. And finally it was at the last point, and Prabhupada was, having his way with me. And I kept ruggedly insisting in my mind, well, he didn't say any, he didn't predict the future. So, and just as I was thinking like that, obviously Prabhupada, you could tell he was seeing right through you. And you felt naked by his vision. And Prabhupada called for Pradyumna, and which was his traveling translator, secretaries for his translations. So he asked for Pradyumna to go bring him the big volume that he translates from. This was a 10 commentary volume of the Srimad Bhagavatam, which has all the major commentaries of the Vaishnavacharyas. So at that time, in the early 70s, he had not read from the 12th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam before. So Prabhupada then asked him, he turned it, get the book. When Pradyumna gave it to him, he turned to the 12th canto and he started predicting the future for the age of Kali. And he started saying, and he looked at me and he said, people will think they're beautiful by having long hairs. And I had this long hair. And he started explaining many of the different predictions in the age of Kali, and I felt so defeated. I hadn't even opened my mouth. I hadn't even, thank God, by Krishna's grace, I hadn't made any offenses other than offensively coming into him. And that was the very first time Prabhupada smashed me. And at that, immediately after the darshan over, I just bulleted out of the room. I mean, didn't see anybody, but ran down the stairs, jumped in the car, and started driving back home to Long Beach. And I was thinking, well, I've been called a miser, and I'm thinking all these different things. And then I'm going over all the stuff that Prabhupada said. And finally I reached home. I said, well, why don't you just face it? I'd just been defeated. And I wasn't used to being defeated, but then I remembered that this is what I was looking for, and here's an honest and regal and powerful guru, and I recognized I had been defeated. So it took a little bit of courage, and so I drove back the next morning and I wrote a check out for $1,000, and I saw Karandar down in the gift shop, so I gave it to him and I made it out to A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, and he looked at it. At that time $1,000 was a really big donation, and he said, "Oh, come, give it to Srila Prabhupada." And I said, "No, that's okay." I survived the first meeting, so he put it, wait here. So he brought it up to Srila Prabhupada, and as he gave it to Srila Prabhupada, he had me waiting there, and he came back down, and he told Karandar to tell me that I have understood. So that was my first meeting with Srila Prabhupada.
The first time I met Srila Prabhupada was in Calcutta, November 1971. I was a Peace Corps volunteer then, not too far from Calcutta, and I used to go into Calcutta for milkshakes. And I was there, and I saw a big poster, Hare Krishna Festival. Well, I was very interested in the Hare Krishna movement. I was curious if it was bona fide or not, because I'd been attracted to the mantra in the West. So I immediately took a trolley to the festival. And at the festival there was, I believe it was Giriraj, Brahmachari then, speaking. Prabhupada was sitting there on the pandal. And it was an audience of all Bengali men. It was a fancy part of Calcutta. They were all in suits and ties, and the devotees were all in dhotis. And then the speaker was saying, "You have given up. You are chasing after the garbage we have given up." Finally, after having lived in India for 6 months, somebody said something that made sense. And I was intrigued. He says, you are chasing after the garbage we have given up. So then I went to the temple afterwards I found out where the temple was and went over there, and there was Prabhupada. And they said, "Would you like to come in and meet Prabhupada?" So I said, "Why, sure." So I walked in, offered a little respect, and so Prabhupada, there was same Calcutta temple, nothing's changed. And so the room was just a room full of mattresses with sheets, and Prabhupada was sitting behind a low table, and there was a few devotees in the room. And when I walked in, some devotees were arguing in the back of the room. I was thinking, this is a pure devotee, and they're arguing? They can just ask him. Because I had understood little about what some of the philosophy was. Of course, I understood later those devotees, at least one of them had shortly thereafter blooped, so wasn't one who was accepting authority. Anyway, I was wondering what was going on. Then Prabhupada said, "So you have a question?" And I said, "Yes. You are pushing this Hindu view, but why not Buddhism?" Kind of a stupid question. So then Prabhupada gave what I think was a very typical response for Prabhupada. "So what does the Buddha say?" Heck, if I knew what the Buddha said. So I went back to my Oriental Philosophy 1 course and said, well, eightfold noble and fourfold path and this and that. And then I turned to Prabhupada and said, well, actually, I don't know what the Buddha said. So he said, well, why are you advocating that path? Or why are you want to know the Buddhist path if you don't even know what the path is? Why are you asking me that question? So at that point, I became a little humbler and just sat and listened.
One time we were in Prabhupada's room, and every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday we would have kirtan in the temple, and alternative days we would go up to his room for darshan. One time we were sitting in his room, and Prabhupada said, "Oh, Saradiya has very nice tilak. Krishnadas has no tilak." And he went around to each and every devotee, pointing out whether they had tilak or not, which indicated that it was very important to him that we wear tilak.
I remember one morning early on, he said, "Can you make halava?" And I hadn't had much Vedic cooking experience. I was a cook by nature, but hadn't done much before I'd done this work. And so I said, "I really don't know the recipe, but I'll call the temple and find out what the recipe is." And so I called the temple, couldn't find anyone who knew what the recipe was. I knew what the ingredients were, but the amounts I didn't know. So coming from a healthy, hippie kind of background, one of the reasons I didn't join the temple was I didn't want to give up raw diet. And I remember my first donation to the temple, my first service, was a 50-pound can of honey, because I felt like we shouldn't be eating sugar. So I speculated, and I made halava with honey. And if anyone knows, you end up with something you could play baseball with. So I remember I made this preparation, I put it in the bowl, and I took it in with his breakfast, and he didn't touch it. There was one small dent out of the corner where he was able to get his spoon into it a little bit. And he was very kind, he didn't say anything to me about it. Later on, Kartikeya Swami made halava that came out fluffy and light, and Prabhupada ate 2 or 3 servings. He said, "This is halava. Find out the recipe." So I did. And just for the record, 2½ water, 1 farina, 1 butter, and 1 1/3 sugar. And the extra water, it was more than what the recipe book called for, but it made it very light. So I've always made halava with that recipe since. Never honey again.
I remembered being so shaking, and Prabhupada called us up and gave us a name, and when he called us up, there was many devotees, and you're just trying to remember, not to screw up, how to say the right thing and remember and do it right, and so Prabhupada said, "Your name is Mahabuddhi," and then he gave some. Mahabuddhi means great intelligence. He started giving some thing out, but I was so awestruck, just like surrendering to Prabhupada, that I didn't even know what he said. I just became dumbfounded. Prabhupada was like that. Normally I have like what's somewhat of a Kshatriya mentality, but in presence of Prabhupada, I was someone who could control me.
When I first met Prabhupada in November 71, right after that I became vegetarian, but I still ate eggs. So when I saw Prabhupada, I said to him very proudly, "Oh, I'm vegetarian now," after I met you. And he said, so are the pigeons and the monkeys who are big rascals. So I became very humble at that moment.
The main thing was cleanliness and punctuality. As a matter of fact, he reiterated that over and over, that is the prime prerequisite for a cook or a pujari, is cleanliness and punctuality. Even later on, I remember once in India, we were traveling, Jamuna and Guru Das and the original group of devotees that went to India. We would go to villages. We would stay in wealthy people's homes, and then we would go out for engagements in villages. And once we went to a village, and they took us to the local Krishna temple, and it was just a little small, hole-in-the-wall kind of a place. And the altar was very dirty. The pujari was wild. He had his front teeth missing, and he would offer very quickly and then turn around and throw the water in our faces. And the main thing was the cleanliness. I saw that it was just very unkempt. So as we were leaving, I asked Prabhupada in the car, I said, "Srila Prabhupada, I have a question about this temple." He said, "Ask me later." So later, when there was no one else there, he said, "What is your question about the temple?" And I said, "Well, you've taught us that cleanliness is essential in deity worship. And this temple was very dirty. And I just wondered, is Krishna really there?" And he said, "Yes, Krishna is there." He said, "Our standard is cleanliness. You keep that standard. Don't judge anyone else by what they do." And he, several times during the time I was with him, he either said to me or I heard him say, "All the rules and regulations are meant for us to apply on ourselves alone, not to judge anybody else." He said, "I saw that pujari," said he was very different, but his heart was for Krishna, and therefore that's what we see.
One time, Guru Das was making a videotape of the deities and the kirtan that was going on, and Srila Prabhupada. And Srila Prabhupada indicated to Guru Das that he should take a videotape of me and my friend, Ali Krishna. We were both wearing nylon saris that were matching. Hers was pink and mine was green. And so we were dancing together in step. And Prabhupada indicated that he should shoot us for the video. So that was very kind of him to notice us.
On one of the morning walks that we were on, he gave Ganesham, now Bhaktitirtha Swami, some personal instructions. And I thought that was so wonderful. And at the same time, I was a little transcendently jealous because I wish I had some. So we went on the walk the next morning, and actually Prabhupada, I asked a question. I said, "Prabhupada, we were visiting all these professors and these big universities, and we were just a graduate from San Diego State, and we're trying to represent you well." I said, "Is there?" I didn't even quite finish the sentence, and he looked at me and he said, and I was feeling like, how can we, help be better qualified and help this? And Prabhupada looked at me, he says, "Krishna is already helping." So as if we thought we were doing the work. So Prabhupada was really good at bringing us back to reality. But then he said, anyway, he said, "You just pray to Krishna. Te sam satriyuktanam bhajatam pritipurvakam dadami buddhi yogam tam yena mama payanti te." And then he goes, "You know what that means?" And I was kind of, and then he translated it. And he explained to those who constantly worship me, love, I give them the intelligence how to come back to me. So he said, "You will pray like that?" And I said, "Yes, Prabhupada." He said, "Every day?" "Yes, Srila Prabhupada." So he said, "In that way, Krishna will supply you the intelligence." So that was like one of the most wonderful times for me with Prabhupada, that he gave personal instruction, which we try to follow. That it's so Prabhupada is such a wonderful personality that that one could dedicate his life fully to just simply trying to enact his desires.
Another time, Prabhupada was coming down the steps of Henry Street Temple. And Henry Street was a very narrow street. And my car was surrounded by devotees. And I was sitting in the driver's seat. And I was thinking, well, I better offer obeisances to Prabhupada. Because at one time I didn't and I got in trouble. I'll tell that story in a moment. So I was thinking, well, I better offer obeisances to Prabhupada. But how can I do it? I can't open the door. There's not enough room. What am I going to do? And I'm just debating mentally on this, and Prabhupada's getting closer to the car. I said, well, I'll offer on the seat. Then somebody's opening the door. Well, I'll offer it, and I started crunching behind the steering wheel, trying to offer obeisances. And Prabhupada gets in the car, looks at me, pats me on the head, and goes, that's okay. Then another time, I was in New York, in the hallway between Henry Street, between Prabhupada's quarters and the temple room. It's a very narrow hallway, and it was lined with devotees, and Prabhupada was walking. And I don't remember the year, but maybe it was 73. And I was embarrassed. I said, boy, people join, they're initiated in 6 months. I'm not even initiated yet. Though I think I was chanting 16 rounds in, but not even initiated yet. And I don't render any service. I was in graduate school. I was very, very embarrassed. I didn't want even Prabhupada to see me. So what I did is when the Prabhupada stepped out of his room, devotees offer obeisances, I hit the dirt immediately. And I said the prayers as slow as I could. So by the time I stood up, Prabhupada would have walked by. Usually devotees say the prayers real quick and stand up so they can see Prabhupada. But I said it real slow. But Prabhupada stopped in front of me. I didn't even know he saw me. And waited till I was done. And I was slow. And then I stood up, and there was Prabhupada right next to me. And he says, he said, nice to see you, and put his arm around me and gave me a hug. And I was amazed.
Well, it's embarrassing to say this in front of all the assembled Vaishnavas, but Prabhupada did tell me one time that I was the king of fault finders. Because he would give me a teaching, and my deepest internal intent was to share it. And somehow, because of my ego, when I would share it, it would sound like fault finding, and there was some of that there. So one of his instructions to me was to give that up, to really take all the instructions and apply them right here, and not worry what anybody else is doing.
Srila Prabhupada treated me like his daughter. I joined the temple with my brother Krishnadas, and we were both the youngest devotees there. So he treated me like his daughter. Sometimes he would ask me or tell me certain things that showed that he was concerned about me. For instance, he told the brahmacharis to tell me to finish high school, to not have any boyfriends, that when I finished high school he would get me married. On a walk he told me, he asked me once, very concerned about how I was feeling, and he said, are you sufficiently covered? So it was these little things that Prabhupada said to me that strengthened my connection with him. I wasn't so actually interested in the philosophy a whole lot. I like the chanting, but it's Prabhupada's personal interest in me that encouraged me, and actually for many years that kept me enlivened to continue devotional service.
I remember one morning, it was a chilly morning in Los Angeles, and Prabhupada would wear his kurta, and then he had 2 chadars put together that he would wear. And one morning I was a little late in getting the car ready, and I ran out and all I had was a kurta on. So we were walking in Cheviot Hills Park, and I would always walk a couple steps behind him. So I was walking, I was cold, but I was walking along, and Prabhupada turned around, and so, just like a brother, he said, "You're cold. Here, take one of these." And he took off his chadars and pulled them apart. I said, "No, Prabhupada, I'm okay." He said, No, you're cold. Wear this." And I again, I said, Prabhupada, these are your chadars. He said, no, wear it, you're cold. So I took his chadar and wore it for the rest of the walk. So kind, my feeling was so much awe and reverence. And he accepted that because that's Lord Chaitanya's instruction, is to be the guru. And that, that's how he can assist me to develop love for Krishna. And his heart was just so much there and present.
Yeah, there was one professor in Philadelphia that was cultivating and brought him to, and we thought, oh, he's teaching a temple and he has all these students. He's an Indian, and so we're expecting Prabhupada, because we've seen Prabhupada. We've talked to a few professors, and he was cordial and nice. In LA, we used to sit in and he'd talk to some of the professors in his garden, and so in this way, this was our business, meeting professors and every day and preaching and trying to connect things to help elicit reviews and get our books in libraries and colleges and be as textbooks all over the world. So this happened at this one place. They invited this Indian professor in, and we thought, he was the head professor on campus and probably was going to be very nice. And so we got him in there, and Prabhupada just blasted him, just tore into him, blasted him, and called him cheater, and practically like annihilated in his darshan room, and then the person left, and we were like all shocked because he was the big person on campus, but Prabhupada didn't care. If he was, as far as he's concerned, he was cheating the people. He was cheating his students and mocking like that. So we learned that actually those who were a little bit successful in the library party, we appreciated the service that we were doing, but we realized we were in one sense in the enemy's camp. They were Mahabuddhi Jnana, many of them, and their business was to downgrade and sort of make mythologicalize the teachings of Lord Krishna. And so our business was to engage them and to have them write reviews and use them for the sake of this of Krishna's goals, to solicit to be able to sponsor our books and get them in the universities and colleges, and that let the students get a chance to examine them. So it was a good training that Prabhupada, we didn't have that appreciation for the professors in the sense of like being attracted to what they were teaching as truthful. So in that sense, we were always in disguise as enemy agents in another camp.
After I met Prabhupada in Mayapur, then I saw him again in Calcutta a few weeks later. I had to go back to Bihar, and then I went back to Calcutta, and I saw Prabhupada and said, "Do you have any questions?" So I said, "Well, Prabhupada, devotees are telling me to offer my food to Krishna," because everyone was preaching to me whenever I was with the devotees. I was the only Westerner there who wasn't a devotee. So boy, did I get preached to. So you must offer your food to Krishna. So I said to Prabhupada, well, I can't offer my food to Krishna because I don't know that Krishna is God. I think about it now. Well, I don't think it's the most brilliant question. But anyway, I said that to Prabhupada. So Prabhupada's response was, oh, that's okay. But then you thank God for the food. And I blurted out, oh, I should thank God silently. I don't know what made me say it. Super Soul kicked me and made me blurt it out. And then Prabhupada said, no, you should out loud thank God for the food so you can explain to everyone what you're doing. So that tiny bit of faith I had that there's God and that we can at least thank God for the food, Prabhupada wanted me to use that tiny bit of realization I had to become a preacher and preach. And so I was amazed by how Prabhupada could deal practically with everything. When a Atreya Rishi came in and Prabhupada was so sick, he used his sickness to convince Atreya Rishi that he's not, that the body and the soul are different. So Prabhupada was very practical and very compassionate. He knew just when I needed a little encouragement, a pat on the head, and just when I needed a chastisement, which may be just through a stare. So practical, compassionate, totally philosophical, and detached. He wanted us to be Krishna conscious, but for our benefit. And I always had the impression whoever Prabhupada was speaking to, he was speaking to them for their benefit, not his benefit. Because myself, I'm preaching, I might be thinking, how many points am I going to get? Am I going to do this? My benefit. When Prabhupada was speaking to you, you knew he was speaking to you for your benefit. And everyone in the room knew that.
When I was with Prabhupada in Los Angeles, I would drive him on the morning walk, just he and I, every morning. And one morning he would go to Venice Beach and walk at the beach. One morning he would go to Cheviot Hills Park and walk in the park. And one morning he would go to a very wealthy part of Beverly Hills and walk in the very expensive homes around a big block. So there was this one house with a large plate glass window in the front, and they had a giant German Shepherd who would always come biting at the window. So one morning as we passed, they let the dog out the front door. And he came charging across the lawn. I'm speculating they had a collar on him that had a perimeter, because he came up to the edge of the grass but didn't come onto the sidewalk. I didn't know that. And I remember my thought is, I'm going to be seriously injured or die here, and it's in Prabhupada's service, and that's okay. So the dog was running across the lawn, Prabhupada was walking with his cane, and the dog came up to the edge, so I turned around to face the dog and stay in between the dog and Prabhupada. And he was barking and snarling at me. And I was there for a few seconds, and I glanced over my shoulder, and Prabhupada had very nonchalantly just kept walking, hadn't hardly paid any attention to what was going on. And so the dog was stopped, still barking, but he was stopped. So I turned around and ran to catch up to Prabhupada, and the dog trailed me along the edge of the grass. And as I caught up to Prabhupada, he turned around and took a wide stance, like a martial arts stance, lifted his cane over his head, and said, "Hut!" And the dog's tail went between his legs. He immediately turned and ran back to the house. And I was amazed. I was amazed and not amazed also. But Prabhupada said, if you take a stick to an animal and give them a hut, they will generally, you don't have to hit them, but they will generally get the message and go on. So years later we were in India, we were in Jaipur, staying at the palace of the king of Jaipur. And in Jaipur they have, I think they're called langurs, big monkeys, Hanuman monkeys, with the real long tail. And the place that Prabhupada's quarters were was around the base of a big bathing ghat. We could see the palace across, and there was this walled bathing ghat that had been built. The ghat was in the roof. And it was a circular part. Prabhupada had a room, and then there was a covered veranda, and a small room that had been his kitchen, was his kitchen. And a monkey had torn the door off the kitchen and eaten all the boga. So they had replaced the door, and I was in Prabhupada's room within a day or so after that happening, and we always kept a stick by the door. So the room was filled with Indian guests and devotees, and we heard this rattling sound. So I looked out the door, and there was a monkey trying to take the door off this room. So I picked up the stick and went outside, and I remembered the dog. I remembered what Prabhupada had told me. So I was about 10 feet away, and he was bent over and down. So as I came up, he heard me and turned around and stood up, and I went, "Hut!" And he looked at me and puffed his chest up and bared his teeth and started walking towards me. And he was almost as tall as I was. And I turned around and ran back into Prabhupada's room. It was so strange, the human-like face, it was very strange. And I went back in Prabhupada's room and opened the door and came in real quick, and he knew exactly, and so did everyone else, what had happened. And he just broke out laughing. He laughed. He said, "You do not know the process." He said, if you had gone to him one more time, he was testing you, if you had just one more time said hut, he would have stopped. So I got my second lesson on animal training from Prabhupada.
I remember one time I asked Prabhupada a question, are there senses in the spiritual world? And Prabhupada looked at the audience and he said, look at this little girl. she wants to go back to Godhead. And in the course of the answer, Prabhupada said, one day Krishna may kiss you. And at that, everyone in the audience laughed.
We had, Ganesham or Bhakti Swami and I we had been in the Sankirtan newsletter a lot for all these book distribution that we had in all the colleges and universities. And I guess after like a few months of reading that, I came to the platform of impurity, like thinking, yes, we're the doer. And Prabhupada is coming to Chicago, and there were the Radha Damodar party, and he was installing so many deities. So there was about 300 devotees there. And many people, oh, Haribo Mahabuddhi, you've done so well. And then Prabhupada had come, and one day, each successive day that he was there, terrible things happened. Like one morning, there was on the installation of Guru Puj, there was a big Guru Puj, about 300 devotees, and myself and Ram Kali and I think Guru Kripa were dancing somewhat wildly, extremely wildly. I mean, if anyone was in the way, they'd probably be knocked down. So Prabhupada stopped the Guru Puj, and he said, Mahabuddhi, what is this dancing? And he goes, that is not Vaishnava jazz. And then he turned to Brahmananda, and he said, show them, was it Kurnatai style, or show them Sankirtan style, whatever. And he had Brahmananda do the Swami step. And then it was like you could hear a pin drop. The artik went back on, and I remember floating back all the way to like the 301st person. And successively, Prabhupada he had a big press conference, and I noticed there wasn't a book table up there for the books, and Prabhupada always wanted to do that. So he put I put books up there, but he just told all the devotees how all of his devotees pay obeisances before they came in. And so when I came in, it was a little late because I just finished setting the thing up, and everybody was all over the place, so I didn't want to make a disturbance, so I just thought I'd slide to the back. And then Prabhupada saw me, and he went just like this, and then turned to Harikesh, and he said words that Harikesh this day wouldn't tell me. But anyways, he severely chastised me because he just told all of his disciples that bow down and pay obeisances, and then I thought it would be kind of awkward for all the camera and stuff like that for him, and I didn't do it. So I was getting smashed one thing after another. We came in the room, and he was having a personal association. It was going all through the library party, man, and he was going, this is Gokulananda, and he's talking about Krishna, and this is Ganesham, talking about Krishna, and then Satsrupa is, this is Mahabuddhi, and he just looked at me and just, next. And so I felt like after 3 days of that, I had committed so many offenses that I was ready to go jump in the Chicago River. And when I finally got to that platform, feeling useless and that we're not the doer of any of our services, then at that point, then Prabhupada again allowed us to have his association. So Prabhupada would teach in many ways. So in the greatest feeling one could have, and many book distributors I'm sure could say that at that time, is you could feel being the instrument of Prabhupada's desire. And once you have that feeling that you actually could do, you were useful in Prabhupada's service, then there's nothing more satisfying or higher. But it was just like Krishna who would manifest with the gopis and then unmanifest if there was any sense of pride or feeling that, we've done something, you become unqualified for the association of such a pure soul. So he's teaching us lessons, not that we are not the doer. This was the mercy of Prabhupada.
I remember also walking on the beach. One day he was walking along and a wave that was particularly big broke and came up, and he had to jump and dance out of the way. And I said, Srila Prabhupada, even the ocean wants to touch your lotus feet. And he laughed, and I don't remember his exact words, but it was very, very humble. He took that glory that had been given to him and turned it to Krishna. I saw him do that so many times, so many times. A couple of times in the temple in Los Angeles. Once on his birthday, he came in from his morning walk and walked in, paid his obeisances to the deities, and went and sat on the Vyasasan, and one by one the devotees spoke about the glories of Prabhupada. And of course everyone was speaking how he had saved their lives and how he was saving the world by bringing Krishna consciousness. And he just listened, he accepted with his eyes closed. He was just listening. And then when the last person had spoken and Prabhupada was going to speak, there was a very long silence. He was very quiet for a long time. And you could have heard a pin drop. And you could see the ecstatic symptoms in his body that he was not allowing to fully manifest. But there was some tears coming and he was shivering. And he said, I thank you, when he finally spoke, he said, I thank you all so much for your praise and how much you show your love for me. He said, but truly I have to say that I am just the servant of my beloved Guru Maharaj. And all this is happening by his grace. I am simply his servant and I'm trying to do what he asked me to do. And it is his grace that is allowing this to happen. And then he stopped and there was more tears. And then he said, and actually, all of you are my gurus. He said, my Guru Maharaj has given me this service to do. And I came here with very little. And it is because of you that this is going on. So I offer you my respects as my gurus.
And then another time, Prabhupada, well, he'd call us in all the time after every scientific conference. Every day he'd call us in to get the results. And Tamal Krishna Maharaj was, of course, his secretary then, and Sri Damodar Maharaj, and Madhava, and Jnana, and Siddhaputa, myself, we'd come in. And one time we came in and Tamal Krishna Maharaj said, so Prabhupada, your scientists are here. And Prabhupada couldn't see that well then. And he said, they're all in suits and ties, because even though the conference was in the Vrindavan temple, we wore suits and ties. And Prabhupada said, so get them chairs. Either Sut Damodar Maharaj or Tamal Krishna said, oh, we're your disciples, we sit on the floor. And Prabhupada said, no, they have to have chairs. But there weren't enough chairs. So I think 3 of us sat in one chair, and one of us sat down halfway pretending we were in a chair. Prabhupada couldn't see that well, but we couldn't sit on the floor, so we had to please Prabhupada. But he wanted his scientists, gentlemen, to be in chairs.
Vaikunthanath and I were the first devotees to go down to Trinidad. And so that's, at that time, practically the only association we had was Srila Prabhupada. So, we'd write him letters and tell him of our progress. We would send him newspaper clippings, to show him what we were doing. And he was very, very pleased, extremely pleased at our preaching endeavors. In fact, the first day we were there, we ended up in the newspaper the very first day we arrived. So we kept very close contact with Prabhupada. And Prabhupada indicated that by using our married life to preach Krishna consciousness, that in this very lifetime we would go back to Godhead.
When we were traveling in India, at one point we went to Surat, and we were guests in the home of an elder banker gentleman named Bhagubai Jariwala. And we had been challenged by being always fed very opulent prasadam, which then translated into dysentery for most of us. And so we were at this man's home, and they were very adamant about seconds and thirds and really serving us nicely. And most everyone was sick. And we were there for a while, a couple of weeks, and not being trained in the Vedic system from birth, we weren't quite up to standard. We didn't, many of us were ill, and the cleanliness standard was not very high in our little ashram in his house. And there were many things that he could have found fault with. Sometimes an occasional devotee would be rude, or I remember sometimes people calling for more prasadam, hey, bring me more. And So when we left his home, on the last day, he came and he gave each devotee an envelope with 51 rupees in it, and which was big for us at that time. That was something no one had ever done. And then he spoke, and he was a little man, small body, thin, beautiful. He was in his 70s, had beautiful, clear eyes, and just this loving countenance. And he spoke, and he said, "I am so honored that you have all been here at my home. It has been such an honor to serve you." He said, "And I really hope," and he started crying. He said, "I really hope that you can forgive me for all the offenses I've committed against you." And then he sobbed. And Prabhupada looked over at us, and his eyes opened up, and he said, "This is an example of a Vaishnava." He said, "This is the quality of a Vaishnava."
I used to run Prabhupada's darshans in Vrindavan and Mayapur during the festivals for about 4 or 5 years, up until his leaving in 1977. So one year in Vrindavan, Prabhupada, you'd have to let all the devotees and different people in up to a certain point, and you'd have to stop the different devotees from coming in. And Prabhupada would always give such wonderful darshan. Sometimes you could just see Prabhupada, just his mercy reaching out to so many people. It was just, you could cut the air, it was so thick, and you just want to cry. And that's just, so if you go to so many darshans all the time, just seeing that is that you seeing the great wonder Prabhupada had over people, had over devotees and visitors. So one day we were in Vrindavan, and a gentleman came, an Indian gentleman in the back. I really didn't pay attention because it was all full room. And Prabhupada said, we're getting toward the end of the darshan, and he goes, "Where's the prasadam?" And that was my responsibility, to make sure everything was there. And I just realized there was no prasadam. Prabhupada had just told me earlier that or the day before, make sure every single person that comes to his darshan gets some prasadam. And he said, if there's not enough, then some of the devotees you cannot. But if there's enough, everyone should get prasadam. So he just looked at me, where's the prasadam? And I was like, so immediately I ran back into the back, and I went into the deity's pujari room and said, where is the sweets are supposed to be for Prabhupada's distribution? And says, well, someone was sick and they didn't make them. And I go, oh my God. So I was looking in there, and I said, and I went into the deity's room just before they were making an offering. And I said, what is that? There was this whole tray of Maha sweets that they were going to give to Radha and Krishna. And I thought, very quickly, and I took that tray. And as I took that tray, you need me to stop? As I took that tray, I brought it into, I put it on a transfer plate because I had it on the deity plate. And I brought it into Prabhupada. Now I was under a dilemma. How am I supposed to offer this? You can imagine, it was like in my neophyte mode. I'm trying to think, now I've got this prasadam. Am I supposed to bow down and offer the 3 prayers first? I was like in this dilemma. Prabhupada just looked at me, obviously like saw through me. He goes, who is this nut of a disciple? And he said, come here. So he called me here, and he said, open this plate I had. And he said, oh, I opened up, and he looked at it. Now just maybe. And so, and trying to figure out what I'm supposed to do, Prabhupada saw my anxiety. He came and looked at it, and I realized just by offering it to the spiritual master, Srila Prabhupada was so potent that that would be accepted for Krishna. After I took it from Krishna's plate. So then I distributed it to everyone. But someone in the back of the room had left without, I guess, first me giving it to it. And Prabhupada said there was one man, he has left. You must give him this prasadam. You understand? You must give. And I'd never seen that before. So it was just a couple of seconds, so I took some prasadam when I expected to see the person just outside the door. But he wasn't there, so, oh my God, I thought so I kept going farther and farther toward the gate, still didn't see him, and finally went to the gate, and there he was at the gate. So just in a matter of seconds, he was up at the front, which I thought was very unusual. But then I had caught him, and I gave him this prasadam and said, my spiritual master wanted me to make sure that you had some prasad. Yes. And then he looked at me and his head was covered with a chadar, and he was very, very unusual features, very, Indian, but very, very regal. And he said, "Your spiritual master is very kind." And it kind of caught me, and he went down the road. I guess I turned in, I went down the road, and he wasn't there anymore. So as I was going back to Prabhupada's, I was thinking, who are these personalities that, that come even in to take darshan of Prabhupada?
Once, when Prabhupada was in London, I was outside the temple and there was a nun, an elder nun, walking by on the street with her garb. She was a Carmelite, which I believe the Carmelites are vegetarians. And I said, "Hare Krishna," and she said, "Hare Krishna." She was an elder woman. And she stopped to talk to me. And we talked for a minute, and I said, "Our spiritual master is here. Would you like to meet him?" And she said, "I'd be honored to." So I brought her in the temple, and I went in Prabhupada's room, and I said, "Prabhupada, there's a Christian nun here who I was speaking to, and she's anxious to meet you." He said, "Oh, bring her in." So she came in, and as I came back in with her, I paid my obeisances. She paid her obeisances. She bowed down, put her head on the floor. And Prabhupada looked up, and he was beaming. And they sat and talked for 10 or 15 minutes about Christianity and Krishna consciousness in total agreement, total accord. He would say something about our philosophy. She would say, "Yes, Prabhupada." And Jesus said, and Prabhupada would say, "Yes," and Krishna said. So for 10 minutes, this dialogue of interfaith went on. And she then said, "Prabhupada, I'm so grateful to have met you. I really appreciate this connection, and I don't want to take any more of your time. I know you have a lot to do. So may I take my leave?" And he said, "Yes, thank you very much." And then he looked to me and he said, "Give her this garland." He had his garland on the desk. So I walked over, and she paid her obeisances again. And as she was coming up, I gave her the garland. And it was so beautiful to see the interchange. Many times I saw Prabhupada do that with people of other faiths. He could always see the heart of a person, and would find that way to see the similarities. And if he saw in the heart of a person that they hadn't really gotten it yet, of whatever faith they were in, sometimes he would be a little strong with them. But if someone was sincere, he was always finding that way to see the similarities rather than any differences.
Some of Prabhupada's godbrothers came to the pandal, and Prabhupada Siddhanta stood up to receive them. Then he realized there weren't enough chairs for them, so he insisted they get chairs. Again, where do you get chairs in Mayapur? Somehow somebody found some chairs, but we had no center, and Prabhupada would not sit down till there was a chair for each of his godbrothers. He's very, very strict that way, of offering the proper etiquette at all the time. And that was Prabhupada's dealings when I was with him. I'd just sit and observe how, just offer the different etiquette to everybody. He knew exactly what to do, the right, perfect thing for everybody. One businessman came to see Prabhupada. He said, "Oh, I want to serve you, Swami. I want to dedicate my life to you. Everything is for you, Swami." So Prabhupada said, "Great, I'm going to Tokyo tomorrow. You come with me and join my preaching tour." "Oh, but I can't go." He knew just how to call bluffs and just how to engage people.
And I remember in London at the same time, Prabhupada's room was on the second floor, I believe, of the temple in Bury Place, second or third floor. And just off of his rooms was the secretary's office. It was almost like a closet, a long closet. Shamashundar was his secretary at that time. And one day I was doing some typing. Sometimes Prabhupada would let me do some minor secretarial stuff. And I was typing, and this head popped in the door and said, "Hello, is Shamashundar there?" in an English accent. And I looked over and I said, "No, he's not here now." And I looked back, I went typing, and then I did a double take because it was George Harrison. And I recognized him. And I said, "He's not here, but Prabhupada's here, and I'm sure he'd like to see you." And he said, "Oh, I don't want to bother him." I said, "I don't think it'd be a bother." And so I went in the room and I said, "Prabhupada, George Harrison is here." And he said, "Oh, send him in." So I went out, and he was waiting outside, and I said, he wants to see you. And he started taking his shoes or socks off, something, and he said, I get so nervous when I go to see Prabhupada. He said, actually, I just got my hair cut to see him. He had had long hair and a beard, and he had cut it short. And so he went in and closed the door. And I stayed outside for a couple of seconds and was just too curious. So I opened the door, and George was dandabat, flat on the floor, saying the prayers in Sanskrit. And so I went in and paid my obeisances, and he sat back by the door. And Prabhupada's desk was on the other side of the room, and he said, no, come closer, come closer. So George kind of inched his way forward, very humble, very humble. And Prabhupada said, no, no, not there, here. And he patted behind his desk. So George came around behind the desk, and Prabhupada, as soon as he was within reach, he reached out and grabbed him and pulled him in and hugged him, put his head on his chest and was messing his hair up. He said, it is so good to see you, so good to see you. How is your wife, Patty? George said, very good, Prabhupada. So they spoke, and George actually asked him, he said, Prabhupada, I've been thinking whether or not I should join the temple or shave my head and actually take up full practice. Prabhupada said, no, no, no. He said, you have a great gift. You have a place in the world where you can spread Krishna consciousness in a big way. He said, rather you stay where you are and adapt Krishna consciousness into your music. He said, I will teach you some of the songs. So George, and next day he came and brought Ravi Shankar. And for a week they would come. George came every day, Ravi Shankar came 2 or 3 times. And Prabhupada would get out Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur's songbook and go through it with George and find songs and give him essences, give him some of the essences to use in his music. And it was such a loving exchange. It was really a beautiful thing to see.
One time I was in a car with Srila Prabhupada going to an engagement, and Giriraj was driving. He had just become a devotee. And we were going to a college engagement, and they didn't know where it was, but I happened to know because I was living there for some time. So I said, we'll just go down this street and turn the corner, and I knew how to get there. So Prabhupada said, oh, Saradiya, she knows everything. So Prabhupada was very encouraging, to the women. I always picked up that he treated us equally.
There were 2 times where Prabhupada and Yogi Bhajan met together. And Prabhupada was very strong about the purity of Krishna conscious philosophy and very much aware of the loopholes in many of the philosophies that were preached by Indian gurus. But with Yogi Bhajan, there was a real brotherhood. When Yogiji would come to see Prabhupada, they would laugh, they would tell jokes, they talked about the upcoming world situation. Yogi Bhajan was very heavy about it. He said, Prabhupada, the streets, my vision is the streets of the major cities of America will be rivers of blood. And Prabhupada said, yes, there is a lot coming. And then Prabhupada said to him on one occasion, you Sikhs have always protected us Vaishnavas. He said, we are the Brahmins, you are the Kshatriyas. You are the ones that came to Vrindavan and saved the temples and saved the devotees. And similarly, when this world situation increases, our movements will join together. And it was a very nice seeing of acceptance by seeing the spirit of a person, acceptance of someone of another, apparently another faith.
We got to visit one time when his godbrothers came, and he was speaking in Bengali, and he asked us to bring down this book. In this book he had the reviews that we had gotten from the library party, and he was so proud reading the different reviews. He had me read some of the different reviews that to his godbrothers. He was so proud of that, and I read one from Ganesham Bhaktitirtha and one of mine, and one from Oxford, and one from one of the schools we went to, and Prabhupada would say in English a bit, say that how scholars these books are being, accepted all the world, and his godbrothers were very much impressed, and I could see that beam of smile that was in Prabhupada, and that sort of instilled so much faith in me, how much important that Prabhupada really wanted this done, and that was for a whole year. It kept us going.
Well, when I was in college, maybe 70, I studied Bhagavad Gita in an Oriental philosophy class. I was in engineering school. And there was only one verse in the entire Gita that stuck in my mind. It was Api said to Sudacharo, even if one commits most abominable activities, one's devotee, they're to be considered saintly because they're rightly situated, to paraphrase a verse. So that verse struck in my mind. And the reason it struck in my mind, I don't really even know. It's not one of the more significant verses of the Gita, but somehow it seemed to me that, well, you're either a saint or a sinner. I was kind of a black and white type person then. I couldn't understand that verse. So then I asked my professor to explain it to me, gave me his I don't know answer, which is, well, it's intuitively obvious. That was his way of saying he didn't know. So I said, okay. Now, I never read Sanskrit in my life, never saw Sanskrit in my life, and and I had read, that was Radha Krishna and Edgerton's Gita I had read just in English. So then when I met Prabhupada, I actually want to find this quote. So Prabhupada says that somehow or other, if someone prays to Krishna, you cannot say he's evil. Prabhupada and I are having a discussion on a point that I had asked Prabhupada, if somebody lives an evil life but prays to become rich, he may still become rich? Prabhupada said, yes, praying to Krishna is not evil. Bob, oh yes, Srila Prabhupada, chuckling. Somehow or other, he prays to Krishna, you cannot say there's evil. Yes, I say. And Srila Prabhupada says, Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, Pi chet sudarcharo bhajate mam anya bhak. Have you read it? Yes, the Sanskrit I don't know, but the English I do. And that was the only verse in Bhagavad Gita that I knew in English, the whole Gita. And that was the very first verse Prabhupada quoted to me in Sanskrit, and then he asked me if I know what it means. And it didn't dawn on me till later that day that Prabhupada did a transcendental trick on me. Krishna did a transcendental trick. And Prabhupada actually knew that was the only verse I knew in Gita, and it's the first one he quoted to me.
One thing that comes to mind is there was a time when Prabhupada was having some physical challenges. And I had come from a sort of a health food background. And there was a doctor in India that also said, no, Prabhupada should eat raw food. I thought, yes, this is good. This is good. I can do that. I can make raw food preparations. And so I told Prabhupada that. I said, this person has suggested eating a very light diet, no ghee. And he said, well, I can do this. I will do this. So I thought, oh, this is going to be really good. His health will become strong. And I prepared one meal like that, and he ate. He said, this was very good. And the next morning, morning prasad was almost always just fruit, simple things. And so I said, what would you like for lunch? And he said, dal, rice, chapatis, halava. And I asked him about the raw diet. He said, since I was a child, I have always loved prasadam, and I'm not going to give it up now. He said, Krishna will protect me. I will eat prasadam and Krishna will protect me. Then, along those lines, there was a time when I was feeling a little bit challenged in my body. I was feeling that ghee and sugar and some of the general fare was too heavy. I would tend to sleep or I would get sick. And when I ate very light food, I would be healthy. And devotees told me, that's Maya, that if you take prasadam, Krishna will bless you. Whatever you get is just a tiny fragment of your karma. So devotees just eat prasadam and they don't worry about health food stuff. So that makes sense. That's philosophically sound. But still, the practical day-to-day stuff was, if I ate a light diet, I served a lot better. That was a lot clearer. So I asked Prabhupada, remembering what he had said for himself. And I said, Srila Prabhupada, when I eat light, it's easier. When I eat heavy, it's heavier. And I understand the principle of just taking prasadam and accepting Krishna's mercy. What should I do? And I was fully ready to do whatever he told me to do. And he said, you should just take prasadam if you're Rupa Goswami. He said, but if you're a neophyte, which all of you are, you have to decide what is good for your devotional service and what is not good for your devotional service. Then I asked him, I said, well, how, if I'm feeling sick and I need to eat something other than what's offered to the deities, how do I offer it? How do I feel like I'm taking prasadam? And he said, if you need to prepare something simpler than what's being prepared for the deities, you prepare it at the same time, you set it aside in a place, it doesn't go on the altar, but it's set aside, and after the offering is over, it's also offered. He said, but you can't make better than Krishna. He said, if you have to take simple, you can do it that way, but you can't make opulent without offering.
Srila Prabhupada came to New York in 1968. He had just come from Montreal, and it was Radharani's appearance day. He came into the temple and fell on the Vyasa sign. And the first thing he said was, I want to thank Srimati Radharani for the beautiful painting she did of Radha and Krishna. And this was the big painting of Radha and Krishna and the 8 gopis that was in the Montreal temple. And he said, I want you to train all the brahmacharinis to paint. Then he said, you should look at these women as goddesses of fortune and not as your objects of enjoyment. So I thought that was very nice.
When we were in Bombay, we were staying in a place called Chembur. It was kind of out on the suburbs of Bombay. And it was in that initial time when there was the original group of devotees. And it was very sweet. We would all go in Prabhupada's room every morning and in the evening also, and it was just dialogue. It was very confidential and open. So the whole mood was really nice. One afternoon, I made paneer, fresh paneer, without pressing it. And I offered it with his fruit offering at 4 o'clock. I put a little honey on top and a little cinnamon or something. And I took it in and he ate about half the bowl. And he didn't comment, but I saw that he had eaten quite a bit. So I thought, oh, I found something that Prabhupada likes. So the next day I made it again. And I took it in, and when I came to get his tray, there was 1 bite gone. So I thought, well, maybe he's not in the mood for it today. So a 3rd day, I made it again. And when I came in to get his plate, he hadn't touched it. And he said, the paneer is very nice, very tasty. But he said, as brahmacharis, he said, we can only eat paneer once a week. He said, otherwise, sex desire. He moved his hand. So that was the paneer instruction.
One time, as Prabhupada's guard there, Prabhupada had me doing something in his room, and Prabhupada, he asked me, where is Bhagavan? I said, I don't know, Srila Prabhupada. And he said, bring me Bhagavan. I said, right now? He said, yes, bring me Bhagavan. And he was so firm, and he looked at me like, in such a look that, it was imperative that, above anything else, I better go get Bhagavan right now. So I ran all along the wall of Mayapur, down the different ages, and Bhagavan wasn't even in the grounds of the temple. And so now, I said, has anyone seen Bhagavan? He said, I think he went to the Ganga. So I remember I was thinking, well, I should go back and tell Prabhupada that if he wants me to go all the way to the Ganga. And I said, and I just thought, it's very imperative Prabhupada, so my instruction was to get Bhagavan and bring him there. So I remember I ran all the way out the gates and all the way through the fields, all the way to the Ganga, and Bhagavan was giving a class at the time at the Ganga, and there was about 50 devotees there sitting and listening. And I remember coming up to him and I said, excuse me, I wasn't bashful or abashed. It was probably one something. I figured, well, I'm not going to be beat around the bush. And I said, Harbo, please excuse me, but Srila Prabhupada wants to see you right now. I said, yeah, I'll go there, and so I'll finish here. And I said, sorry, Prabhu, but Prabhupada wants to see you right now. And he looked at me like, yeah. I said, I'm just coming. And then I got more emphatic. You don't seem to understand. Prabhupada wants you right now. So get your stuff and let's go. I told him like that, and he had never seen such arrogance in a brahmachari. I think that's commending him to go do this. But anyway, somehow I think he felt my purpose, and I practically grabbed him to come and get it. And when I was going there, he was a little bit slower coming through the gate, so I ran straight up to Prabhupada's thing, and Prabhupada was still in that pose. He was still looking as if he hadn't even broken his glance from when he told me before. And he looked at me, and then as soon as he came in, he was like waiting for the report. He said, I have brought him Srila Prabhupada. He was at the Ganga, and he says, very good. And I was like, whew, a great weight coming up. So that one has to be, Prabhupada was unabashed in the sense that as a disciple, we have to follow his instructions. That's our very life and soul. We have no idea what Krishna consciousness is out. None of us understood it about Krishna, who he was, or devotional service, or Sankirtan, or prasadam. None of these things. It wasn't except for Prabhupada who gave us that. And his instructions to us, disobeying or not following his instructions, meant we were nowhere. So even such a simple instruction, that we have no meaning why or what did he want it for, but it was so emphatic that he said it, that we better do it, and we better do it right and now. And there wasn't anything, I think, my mind was determined there wasn't anything Bhagavan to do. Literally, if I have to carry him there, then he was going to have to come see Prabhupada.
Around August of 1968, I went with the devotees, Malati, Shamasundar, Mukunda, Janaki, Gurudas, and Jamuna. They were going to Montreal to see Srila Prabhupada. They were going to go on to London to start the temple, and I was going to go on to Boston to join Jadavani and paint. So in Montreal, Srila Prabhupada gave them instructions, what he wanted them to do with Sankirtan, how to perform the kirtan, like that. That time I met my future husband, Vaikuntanath. Being very young, I was 17 years old, and I was very confused at that time. So I wanted to speak to Srila Prabhupada about this. So I went into his room in Montreal, and I told him that I was attracted to Vaikuntanath. And I assumed that Srila Prabhupada would preach to me to, get me out of my Maya. And Srila Prabhupada said, oh, he says, so you want to get married? And I thought, that thought hadn't really occurred to me. But since Srila Prabhupada suggested it, I said, okay. So then he said, I will speak to him. So Vaikuntanath was in New York at the time, very briefly. And then he came back to Montreal, and Prabhupada called him into his room and asked him if he would like to get married to me. And he agreed. So basically, Srila Prabhupada arranged our marriage. And Prabhupada told me that after I finished high school, when I was 18, he would perform the wedding. In India, he said, girls get married at the age of 12. But in this country, wait until they're later. And he said the marriage will be very pomp. He said it would be a very nice wedding. So the next year, 1969, Srila Prabhupada came to Boston in May, and I had finished high school. I was almost finished high school, and I thought, okay, this is it. And so Prabhupada performed the wedding ceremony. There was me and Vaikuntanath, Janava and Nanda Kishore, Rukmini and Bharadwaj. And this is the first time a Vedic wedding had been performed in Boston. So there was some newspaper reporters, in fact 2 newspapers, who reported on this occasion. And Srila Prabhupada performed the wedding ceremony, and after the wedding, Prabhupada says to me, "So, Saradiya, now you are happy?" And then I remember we gave him a plate of prasadam, a lot of prasadam. And Prabhupada sitting on the Vyasa sign, and he looks down and he says, "But I'm not God. I cannot eat so much," in regard to the prasadam. And, I must not avoid this. During the fire sacrifice, Prabhupada was talking about how the woman should be covered from head to toe. Even the sun should not see her. And he said, and they should not wear miniskirts. And everyone laughed. And I knew that was for me, because when I first became a devotee, I used to come to the temple in miniskirts. And so the next morning, we got to go on a walk with Prabhupada, just me and Vaikuntanath and maybe one other devotee. And Prabhupada says to me, "So you are no longer Miss Saradiya, now you are Mrs. Saradiya." So that was very sweet of him.
Kartikeya Swami's mother had cancer and was passing away. And he went to be with her. And as she was taking her last breath, she looked up at him and said, "Is your Krishna with me now?" She died. And Prabhupada said when he heard this, he was just so grateful and so loving with Kartikeya. He said, "You have saved your mother." He said, your devotion, even though his mother was not favorable before that, her last words were, "Is your Krishna here now?" And Prabhupada said, "Your mother has gone back to Godhead because of you."
There was another pastime where Prabhupada was sitting on the Vyasa-san in Atlanta, and we were very close to him right there. And he was given a mridanga to play, and Prabhupada was playing mridanga. So he asked the devotees, "You know that song, Parama Karuna?" And the devotees kind of learned, yes, Prabhupada. And they sing along. So Prabhupada he said this beat that no one knew, and I think only now Kardama Muni is the only one who can sing it like that Prabhupada did. And he would sing Parama Karuna, and then he said, "And then you follow," and no one could follow. No one knew the words, no one everything, and then Prabhupada could sing like no one knew it. There's 100 devotees there, but no one knew it, So Prabhupada would sing through it, and then says, "Now you're ready to follow?" He said, "Yes." Everyone's ready to follow. I said, so people were kind of ready to try to follow with it. And so Prabhupada were thinking he's ready to play, so Prabhupada sits up there and tells them to play the tape. And so Prabhupada's sitting on the Vyasa-san and his tape's playing Parama Karuna. And that was like kind of a first for us, because Prabhupada's there and he's playing his tape now. And I'm supposed to follow after the tape. And then at that point he said, "So is there any difference between my tape and he's saying?" So he let us know that, he's in his tape as much as he's, speaking to us personally. So we can take great solace that his tapes have been recorded for prosperity and austerity, saying that if we just listen to his tapes now, even 20 years later, that they're non-different than Prabhupada speaking at the time. So when he spoke Bhagavatam class, or when he gave his darshans, he was speaking to millions of people through all different generations, so we get a chance to hear these things. So no other acharya in our system had such a great opportunity to speak to unlimited numbers of people for an unlimited period of time.
What actually convinced me of Prabhupada is whatever I asked, he could give a cogent, satisfying answer. There was never any doubt that Prabhupada understood the philosophy, and there was a question, there were some things that I couldn't understand yet. There's a process of understanding it. And Prabhupada never tried to force understanding down my throat, but he made it clear to me that there's a process. He said, you follow these boys and girls like they're doing for 6 months, then you'll understand also. And he made the point to me that there's a process of understanding. I just can't walk in off the street, with no regulative principles and understand everything. So Prabhupada was very patient about that. And he was very confident that if you want to, it's your choice, you follow this process, you can also experience what they're experiencing and be happy.
One time we were in Bombay, and it was one of those times where, not by any qualification, but just by that blessing of Krishna and Guru, you get a little taste of what transcendental energy really is. We went to a village and I set up a table, and many of the elder women got really into it. They were getting flowers and they were really in a worshipful mood. So Prabhupada was sitting on the Vyasasana and we had the kirtan and I was doing the pujari work, and I really felt like I was serving Krishna. I could feel the love in the offering. Generally it was done in a good mood, and there was a limit on the consciousness. And this one time Prabhupada opened the lid, and the arti went on for close to an hour. And as I was offering the different items, I was actually feeling it. I was feeling the connection with Krishna and Radha. And as I was fanning, I remember getting chills in my body that, it was ecstatic. And I knew it was a gift. And as I turned around to fan Prabhupada, he was smiling. He was right watching me, and he was smiling very big. And after the arti was over and the prayers had been said, I took the water and the flour over to him. And I was still feeling this. And I offered him the flour and I sprinkled the water on his head, and he looked up at me and he said, "Thank you so much." And I melted. I hit the floor. I started crying. It was a wonderful gift of, this is what it's like to serve Krishna. Now work for it.
Prabhupada came from London and we were talking about the beautiful deity worship in London. And this is Boston of 1969. So then he looked back behind and he looked at the big Jagannath deities. And he said, "Who has made these nice deity clothes?" And someone said, "Saradiya." So Prabhupada said, "Thank you very much." And then he threw back his head and he started laughing. "Is Saradiya still fighting with her husband?" And everyone laughed. And he said, "Don't fight with your husband. He's a good boy. Anyone who comes to Krishna consciousness is good." And I should also mention that the temple was jam-packed. Must have been over 100 devotees at the time. So needless to say, I was embarrassed, but also pleased to be noticed by Srila Prabhupada.
Atlanta, one time when Prabhupada came to Atlanta, it was in 1975. I think he arrived in February, just before March, the end of February. Prabhupada arrived he was just on his tour went to Mexico City, to Crocus, and as he said, to Miami, and then he went to Atlanta. And Atlanta, everyone converged at that time. The library party, the Radha Damodar, and everyone was coming from all over America to see Prabhupada in Atlanta. They were just installing Gaurnitais. And Prabhupada came and he said, I visited all those places, and now I visited Atlanta, and I could see this temple is the best. And of course he said that everywhere he went. So Prabhupada would encourage everyone, but then he started speaking. He was standing in front of the Gaurnitai deities, which are very beautiful there. And he'd be looking at the deities, and he'd look at the deities like not as we would look at the deities, because he would see Gaurnitai, and we obviously weren't pure enough to see. So he'd be looking at the deities and said, these two lords, Parama Karuna, are very, very merciful. Yeah, Lord Chaitanya, Lord Nityananda, born in time, and is even more merciful than Lord Krishna. And Krishna is very merciful, but Lord Chaitanya, he is so merciful. And then Prabhupada went into ecstasy, and he choked up, and so please serve him very much, very nicely, thank you. And from that minute, anyone who was in the presence, it wasn't as if Prabhupada was seeing Gaura-Nitai. It wasn't like, these are deities there, and we're worshiping, we're trying, and we understand they're non-different. Prabhupada was seeing Gaura-Nitai, and he was so appreciative of the mercy of Lord Chaitanya that he went in ecstasy, and all of the disciples there at that time was, just stunned by the emotion Prabhupada felt for the Supreme Lord.
When we went to India, we did Pandal programs, the Cross Maidan that Radhanath Swami was talking about, and often we would do programs like that. And inevitably someone would come in a Sahaja mood and come usually up front and start chanting and dancing with us and start exhibiting symptoms of ecstasy, crying or falling on the ground. And on a number of occasions, Prabhupada would see, I remember at Cross Maidan, as a matter of fact, an elder, thin man with a shaved head came up and started dancing and doing his brand of ecstasy. And Prabhupada leaned over and told one of the devotees, go throw a bucket of water on him, because he saw that it was just a show. And he really encouraged not putting on a show about devotional service. I remember actually when I first joined the temple in Los Angeles, there was a brother there, tall brahmachari, who would go into crying ecstasy every time we'd have a kirtan. At the end, when the prayers were being said, he would be on the floor weeping and crying for Krishna. And I remember thinking, well, I guess that's what we're supposed to do. and I would try and get myself a little bit to be more of a bhakta. And then Prabhupada commented on it one day, not directly at him, he was very kind, but he brought up that, please don't try and imitate the symptoms of advanced devotees, just remain humble. And then I got it, and he left, actually.
One time I was in Prabhupada's room with Rukmini and for a darshan, and Prabhupada said something like to us, the cloth may be cheap, but it should be clean. So he was talking about our clothes, our saris. So Prabhupada noticed everything.
Coming from a Southern California raw food background, I asked him at one point, when I first moved into the temple, I just surrendered and ate prasad. Then I got to be with Prabhupada, so I had a kitchen that I could do what I wanted. So I wanted to make sure that I was not going against what Prabhupada would want me to do. And I was eating salads and fruits and simple food. And so one day I decided I should ask him about it and make sure it was okay. So I asked him about raw diet as opposed to taking prasad. He said, actually, raw diet is the best diet for Krishna consciousness. He said, it's simple, it keeps your body healthy and clear. He said, we don't tell the masses about it because most people can't follow it, and we don't want them to get distracted from Krishna. He said, but if you can do it, it's the best diet for your Krishna consciousness. And also, one of the things that I had to give up when I moved into the temple was yoga practice. I did hatha yoga practice. And everybody told me that is not our yoga. Our yoga is bhakti yoga. Hatha yoga is included in that, and you don't really need to do it. Just dance and kirtan. So I was stubborn about that for a while too. And when I moved in the temple, there was just no place to do it and no time. Then when I got to be with Prabhupada, I started doing it again. I would go in the early morning, mid-morning, before doing his cooking in the backyard and do some yoga asanas. And another thing was I wanted to make sure it was okay. So I had been doing it for 2 or 3 days, and I decided I'm going to ask Prabhupada if this is okay. So, as it would be, he brought it up before I did. I cooked his lunch, and I had full intent to ask him about it that day. And when I brought his plate in, he said, "I see you're doing yoga exercises in the yard." I said, "Yes, sir, I actually was going to ask you about that. The devotees told me that that's not bona fide, that it's not our process." And he said, "Actually," he said, "these exercises are very good for your health." He said, "We don't want anyone to become distracted, so we don't teach it. But for you," he said, "it's very good, and I encourage you to do it." Then, a short time afterwards, we were in San Diego and taking a walk in the park, and there was someone doing the headstand off in the distance. And Prabhupada looked over, he said, "Oh, this is Shirsasana, very good for the health." He said, "There are so many of these exercises, Shirsasana, Yogasana, Padmasana," he named. He said, "very good for the health." And one elder godbrother, in a bit of a sarcastic tone, not towards Prabhupada, but towards yoga, said, "So we should do this every day, Prabhupada?" And he didn't answer him. And he just kept walking. And when he finally got back to the car, he turned around and he said, "It's not necessary." And I remembered what he had told me, and I realized that he was answering the mood of the question. And that the real idea is that whatever's good for your Krishna consciousness, do it. Whatever's not good, stop it.
At the airport one time, Prabhupada was talking to various devotees, and he said, "Brahmananda, you are always in Brahman." Actually, he said, "Brahmananda, you are in Brahman?" And then he said to Arundhati, and this was before Arundhati got married to Prajumna, who was a Pandit. And he said, "Arundhati, the wife of a great sage." Then he said to Nandini, no, he said to Balai, who had a little girl named Nandini, he said, "She is chanting Hare Krishna?" He's asking about the little girl Nandini. "She's chanting Hare Krishna?" And Balai said, "No." And Prabhupada said, "Oh, she is sucking Hare Krishna."
So then, the last time I saw Prabhupada, I was in New York. I'd just gotten about to get initiated, or got initiated, I don't remember, in '76 at Ratha Yatra. And Prabhupada wasn't feeling that well then, but he was in the temple room one morning, and he was giving out cookies. So I walked up to get cookies, and I said, "Wow, I can offer a base and get a cookie, and Prabhupada's going to be glad to see me. Actually rendering some service now. I'm getting initiated." I didn't understand that he's offering the service, the initiation. I thought I was rendering service. And so I walked up to Prabhupada thinking, oh, he's going to recognize me. Boy, all the devotees are here. He's going to recognize me. I walked up to get a cookie, and Prabhupada looked at me as if I was a blank, a totally transparent sheet of glass, and saw right through me as if I wasn't there. And only Prabhupada could have that look. And that humbled me, hopefully, for the rest of my life.
I think the most wonderful thing for us with Prasadam part was the several times that Prabhupada would individually take some Prasadam and give it to us. And we took that as blessings, because you'd go a whole year or so just, and maybe Prabhupada would come visit America, and you get a chance to visit one place where Prabhupada would be at, and then again in India. But so you'd have to, whatever association that you'd have with Prabhupada, you'd have to cherish in your heart and remember it. And that was that personal association was wonderful. But you'd also feel Prabhupada so strongly in your service that we would be knocking on doors and we wouldn't know what to say, and we'd just be praying to Krishna and Prabhupada, and then you'd feel Prabhupada's strength within you. Somehow or other these things were happening in most amazing situations, and you know that Prabhupada was there, so you would feel that spiritual life is real, the association and surrender to the spiritual master is real, is necessary. So those are very instructive feelings on Sankirtan. So
in Vrindavan, 1972, October, I finally got a chance to see Srila Prabhupada. I hadn't seen him for 3 years because I always kept missing him. When I was down in Trinidad, he was in India. When I went to New York, he had just left New York. When I went to India, he had just left India. So finally, at this time, I got to see him. I remember him walking down the street in Vrindavan and thinking, of course I know that Srila Prabhupada is none different than his picture or his personal form. But I do remember thinking, it's so nice to see him. And we had a big reception at the Radha Damodar temple. And Prabhupada said, this reception, he said, it is not for me. It is for my foreign boys and girls. And he was encouraging us this way. He said, these young boys and girls are helping me. Then he said, Saradiya? He said, she is helping me. And then he said, where's your husband? And I said, he's right here, Srila Prabhupada. And he said, why are you so skinny? I said, well, he just got over jaundice. And then Srila Prabhupada said what he should do to help with jaundice. Take some rock candy and put it in a glass of water, and the first thing in the morning drink it, and to boil green papaya. But when he kind of singled me out in this way, after not seeing him for a few years, I knew that he was very pleased by our preaching work. I remember in San Francisco trying to please him by buying him some cloth. I remember trying to buy him a dhoti. I remember knitting him a pair of slippers. And I remember buying him a manga. And in each case, he was not pleased with the gifts I offered. So I knew that my offering was preaching.
Once I gave Prabhupada something with boys, I think it was fresh boysenberries. And he said, oh, this is very good. What is this? And I said, well, that's called a boysenberry. It's a cross between a couple of different kinds of berries by a man named Boysen. He said, it's very good. Poisonberry? And I said, no, sir, boysenberry. And he laughed. He was joking. And so I told the devotees that story. As you know, it's one of Prabhupada's lighthearted, joking moods. And sometime later, not too long later, boysenberries were in the kitchen, and one of the Matajis said, you can't offer those, they're poisonous. Prabhupada said they're poisonous. So I told Prabhupada, I said, you had joked with me about boysenberries and poisonberries, and now the story is out that boysenberries are poisonous. And he laughed. He said, everyone is saying Prabhupada has said this and Prabhupada has said that when I've never said. He said, believe what you hear in my books and what you hear me speak, and take everything else with a grain of salt. Another example of that was in Bombay. There's the chickpeas. How many chickpeas can we eat? So I was carrying Prabhupada's plate through the prasadam room of devotees. The devotees were at one end of the building and Prabhupada's room was at the other end. So I was taking his plate through and I heard someone say, well, you can only serve 7 chickpeas. Prabhupada told us that in New York. And somebody said, no, it's 11. I heard it in Los Angeles. Somebody else said, no, it's 21. He told us that. So I went into Prabhupada's room and I gave him his plate and I said, Srila Prabhupada, there's a controversy going on about how many chickpeas we can eat. Somebody's saying 7, someone has said 11, someone has said 21. And he gave the same answer. He said, everyone is quoting this and that and this and that. He said, again, believe what you hear from me directly and what you hear in my books. And as far as chickpeas are concerned, eat as many as you can digest. And I remember Prabhupada also took Ayurvedic medicine. He said, the 3 things that keep me healthy are my morning walk, my massage, and the Ayurvedic medicines. So he would take every other morning he would take preparation of a big black cardamom seed pounded up in the mortar and pestle, and then one little pill of Jogendra Ras, which was a heart medicine made of pearls and coral and other things. I would pound up the cardamom seed, and then I would mix in the Jogendra Ras, and then a 1/4 teaspoon of honey, mix that together, and water. And it was a boat-shaped mortar, so I would just grind it up in there, and then he would drink it out of the... So one morning, I had extra honey on the teaspoon, so I put in about a 1/2 teaspoon of honey. And I thought, well, it'll just be sweeter, and, maybe Prabhupada will like it. So I took it in, and he drank it. About 5 minutes later, he rang his bell, and I came in, and he said, "How much honey did you put in the medicine?" And I said, "Well, I had a little extra on the spoon, so it's about a 1/2 teaspoon." He said, "Keep it at a 1/4. He said, "I'm intoxicated."
Right before Prabhupada left, I went to India to give the conference with Damodar Maharaj, Sudha Puta Prabhu, and others on the first international conference on life comes from life, and I was a geologist giving a paper on evolution. So I arrived with Atreya Rishi. We ended up on the same plane. And we went right to see Prabhupada, and we walked in Prabhupada's room, and Atreya was shocked, as I was, to see Prabhupada so thin, and Prabhupada could see. Prabhupada was so thin, just all bones, how shocked Atreya was. And he turns to Atreya. Atreya can give you more details. And he says, so I've been preaching to you that I'm not this body. Now you see my body is gone, I'm still here. Now do you understand I'm not this, you're not this body? And he used Atreya's shocked expression to emphasize the point, he's not this body.
I remember Prabhupada is not so much in the past. A lot of times we look at things as reminiscences of Prabhupada, but Prabhupada now in the present. He would say, many times, I remember in Atlanta when he was offering Guru Pooch to his spiritual master, he would say when he first came to America that, he was trying to do this impossible, but he did not feel alone because his spiritual master was always there. So Prabhupada, although every devotee of every disciple of Prabhupada devastated, Prabhupada left us, but Prabhupada left us physically, but his instructions are ever much present. And he's there even with us today if we take the time to want to follow those instructions. So Prabhupada in the present is also, he's not finished with his pastimes. And so we just hope that somehow either we can not commit so many offenses to all my God brothers that we can be around somehow to help participate in those. Because Prabhupada wanted this planet to be changed, and he wanted this Varnashram to be implemented, and so many things that they're waiting to be done. They're already successful. It's just a question of being qualified enough to participate in them. And that's the thing. The devotee has to become qualified to take the mercy of his spiritual master by following his instructions and becoming very serious about implementing and serving the lotus feet of his spiritual master.
Okay. There was one question I asked Prabhupada that was at the time in the movement, the shot heard around the world, because Prabhupada hadn't expressed this thought before, and it really shook people up. And I asked Prabhupada at one point, he was discussing karma. So you suffer because you're karma. So I said to Prabhupada, I didn't want to challenge him at all. I remember thinking, well, I don't want to challenge him, but I have this question. So a way I put it, Prabhupada said, Prabhupada, I asked you this very humbly. Do you get sick? Thinking that if he got sick, it's from karma. And Prabhupada said, oh yes, I get sick. And I said, but you're a pure devotee, and pure devotees shouldn't have karma. You clap your hands, and from the deities, your karma is gone, and you're not accumulating more karma, so why is it you're getting sick? And Prabhupada then said, oh, I'm not a pure devotee. He spoke very humbly. But I think he said, like, Radharani is blessing, something like that. I don't remember precisely. And then I pursued it a little further. I said, well, why is it you suffer then? Is it the way Christ was suffering? Something like that. And Prabhupada said, the reason I suffer is because I have done one sinful thing. I have taken too many disciples. And when you take too many disciples, then you must suffer the sins of your disciples. The spiritual master suffers. And that was a very, very heavy thing, Prabhupada said. And even though I wasn't in the society, I understood that was very heavy at that time. And the devotees there, they were awestruck. They were just walking to walls thinking that my sins are affecting Prabhupada. Because everyone had total affection for Prabhupada and that my sins would affect it. So Prabhupada made that statement. And he said that my sinful activity is taking too many disciples, but for preaching purposes, I'm willing to take that suffering. Just for the sake of preaching, I'll take too many disciples.
Prabhupada had talked about there being people in our movement who aren't devotees, that they're here for ulterior motives. And there was one person in particular on 2 occasions that he pointed out to me was of that mind. Someone who was very charismatic, very powerful, held a high position. Once he told me that he said he had been ill, and he said, all my disciples were praying for me to get well, except for this person, and he was praying for my death so he could take over. And another time there was, you probably remember the GBC disbanding back. There was a bunch of stuff that came up. I was traveling with Prabhupada, and the information came that there had been a rezoning of the world and that different people had taken different positions, and he heard about it and he became furious. He said, this is total nonsense. And he pointed out this person. He said, this person has spearheaded this just because he wants to take over the world. And I remember at that time he said, send a telegram to every center telling them that the GBC is temporarily disbanded. The temple president is the only authority at this time until further notice. He said, you don't need to send anything to New Vrindavan, because at that time he really trusted in Kirtanananda Swami. And he also said, now call Karandar and find out what the truth is. He had implicit faith in Karandar. He turned to Karandar as in many ways as an equal, as I saw it, as someone who was so totally trustworthy in his management and in his ability to be Krishna conscious around all this stuff. But this person was in Vrindavan. I was in Vrindavan 2 weeks before Prabhupada passed. And they asked me to act as his guard. So I was there as his guard and was very moved. As many devotees have probably told you, the situation was very intense, very heavy. Prabhupada's body was very frail. And Brother Bharadraj was singing beautifully, as he always did. Prabhupada absolutely loved Bharadraj and his singing. He would listen to Bharadraj and Yamuna Devi, and when he would hear them sing, he would go into trance. He would just listen. Sometimes he would call me and ask me to put on the Govindam album when it was a record, and he would sit and listen to Yamuna Devi singing Govindam, and he would just go into trance. He would say, "Oh, this is so beautiful. She is such a devotional person." And he would say the same about Bharadraj. He loved his singing. And so Bharadraj was singing one day for Prabhupada, and it was a very somber mood. He was in his room, devotees were all gathered around, everyone was sitting on the floor except this person who was sitting on a chair. And Bharadraj was singing, and he hit a note where his voice broke. He was emotional. And this person elbowed him and laughed and made fun of his making a mistake. This person was a singer and a musician himself. And I realized that I have a situation here that I have to decide what to do. I'm Prabhupada's guard. Prabhupada has told me this person is praying for his death. I see him in that mood. What do I do? So the alternatives were there. Either kill the person or go to the senior godbrothers and share what I knew. Of course, the first one was out. So the second one, I thought about it and I thought I wouldn't be heard. He wields power, and I don't in the same way. And the third alternative was to leave, because I couldn't see it. I couldn't be there and see that. So I left. And at that time, Kirtanananda was there very, very sincerely spearheading the group of devotees who were begging Prabhupada to stay. Please, Prabhupada, we can't do this without you right now. We're not advanced enough. We need you here. And I remember him crying and begging Prabhupada to stay. And Prabhupada just yawned. He said, all right, I'll stay. So because he said that, I thought he was going to stay. And I just realized I don't want to stir up trouble in this special time, and I can't watch it. So I left Vrindavan and left India. And 2 weeks later, Prabhupada passed.
Another time in Mayapur, another important instruction, it was just myself and Prabhupada in his room, and he had been just finishing, he was writing some things and on his desk, and I just given him some coconut water, his daub, and I was in there straightening some things up and sat down just by the door and chatted a little bit while Prabhupada was working in there. So then Prabhupada's sister, Pisama, came, and I had her wait at the door first, and I said, Prabhupada, your sister's here, would you like to speak to us? Yes. Bring her in. So I opened the door to let Pisama in, and she came in and sat down, and they started speaking in Bengali. And so I got up to walk out the door, and I had a few things I thought I'd do before the rest of the people came for that evening. Just within a few minutes there, and Prabhupada looked at me and said, where are you going? I was just going outside. I said, no, come sit. So he had me sit down, and the conversation went on with his sister for about another 20 minutes, half hour. And I was thinking, I'm going to be chastised again. I've done so messed up again. And so I was just chanting, and I didn't know what was said. It was all Bengali. And then his sister finished, and she went out of the room, and Prabhupada turned to me. There was no one else there. Prabhupada turned to me and he said, a sannyasi is never alone in a room even with his mother and sister. And then he quoted that verse. Now, Prabhupada wasn't having to show anybody specifically like this, but yet that example was very instructive, that he hears Prabhupada and hears his sister, who's very old also, and it's his sister, but yet showing so much by the example. So, for all of our sannyasis out there, it's a wonderful verse. And showed Prabhupada was non-different. I mean, it wasn't that Prabhupada would say something and doing something else. In that way, he affected all of our hearts who were trying on the front of preaching, that our whole moments of appreciation, our movement was just a little time we got to spend with Prabhupada, and that he was pleased with what we're doing. But seeing his example, there was no dichotomy, there was no hypocrisy. Prabhupada was Prabhupada, and as he spoke and as he put in the books, so he lived his life. And that type of leader you can follow anywhere.
Oh